This showcase will be focused on space for health, and we have some exciting presentations from both fellows and special guests as well. So, a few words about the RSA. As you probably know, RSA is a 270-year-old social change organization that was involved in various projects in the last centuries, including initiatives to abolish child labor, organizing major international exhibitions, creating a scheme to preserve heritage in urban areas, encouraging secondary education, and also encouraging the development of new technologies. It's a huge network, and when it's about space, the space network at the RSA is very simple. It's the RSA plus the component of space. The RSA space network is focused on three themes: regeneration, prosperity, and health. And you probably saw that in the new RSA journal. This is not only about the technology, this is not only about the applications, but also about the inspiration for creating new arts, new performances, and also new innovations to help life on Earth and beyond. So I usually like to start with a question, and it's a matter of, is it too late to go to space? If you are over 26, you probably will think that, because Valentina Tereshkova went to space at 26 years old. There are even younger people going to space right now, young as 18, but it's not too late. Even if you go over 77, biologically and anatomically speaking, you still can go to space. If you're over 77, it's actually not too late. We have Edward Joseph Dwight Jr. that just went to space at 90 years old, 8 months and 10 days. So it's never too late. Space is for everyone, and we're hoping in the future to have more and more people going there. When it's about the relationship between health and space, it's not only about developing new technologies and finding new ways for treatments, new medicine, or new technologies, but it's also about how to improve human health at scale. So some technologies such as the lunar lander technologies were used to stabilize buildings. That was essential during the earthquake in Japan over 10 years ago. And also having radiation-resistant rovers helped saving millions of lives in Europe during the Chernobyl cleaning that otherwise it would have been impossible to do without loss of human life. So space is essential not only for exploration, but also for preserving and improving human life. Also, not all life on space is good. Some things are developing there, and there will be some interesting presentation about that. Life in space might be challenging in the future, but in the same time, life in space might be very useful to create new treatments. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the first guest today, Brage Johansen. Brage is passionately working with sustainable green technology solutions organizations companies. He's the co-founder of and CEO of Spectrum Blue, a deep tech company with solutions for Earth, for health, properties, and space industries. And he's also passionate about astronomy and the cosmology. Brage, you have the stage and the screen.
Thank you very much, Silvio. Let me see. I'll try to. Yes. I decided early in life to go for astronomy as my career, and I had to explain to my grandparents and uncles and aunts and everything that I was not going to be an astronaut. I was going to do astronomy, but I didn't go there. I just worked with space projects as a computer scientist the latest years. So now I'm the co-founder and CEO of Spectrum Blue, and we make healthy and safer spaces on Earth and in space. So the big question is, can paint save lives? And reduce contamination. Oops, sorry. So today we have lots of global problems and with pandemics and infections and mold and which are breaking down buildings and materials. And it's all increasing with wetter and warmer climates. And we're something called healthcare associated infections. That the infections you get when you are at the hospital, not when you go to the hospital. That's because all the the microbes that are resistant to antibiotics are in the hospital. And it is a huge cost. Even in small Norway, where I'm sitting, it's a huge cost. But for other countries, it's even worse. So how can you remove that? And one of the solutions for that is to coat things, to coat touch surfaces. And that's also what we're working on in the space projects. As Silvio mentioned, space bacteria and space mold is not a joke. It's really an important subject that are a problem for human health and for the integrity of materials. And this picture here is from the Mir space station, but unfortunately, the International Space Station has serious problems too, you have to fix it somehow. Luckily, or as a problem, life is very stubborn, and this is an article about mold that is surviving actually on the outside of the space station and on satellites that we send to other planets and moons. And of course, we don't want that because we want to don't infect those places with our biology. So one of our visions is to make space stations and spacecrafts with fresh air, reduce bacteria, virus, and mold, and that without opening a window to get fresh air in. That was so we have big imagines for Earth too. We try to contribute to a society with 24/7, 365 protection against the next pandemic. We try to drastically reduce the health-associated infections that I mentioned a couple of slides ago. And we're trying to make buildings with no mold. So that's all big imagines, but I mean, you have to work against something, towards something. So this is our product. It's called Q-Field. It's a pigment that it's a particle made of titanium dioxide and some other elementals. And it's a photocatalytic. It creates a quantum electric effect that in the touch surface. It's totally harmless for people. It's impossible to notice if you touch it. It's non-toxic. It doesn't spread any particles in the environment, such as copper and silver and zinc and other biocides. It works in the whole light spectrum, so you can use ordinary indoor light to charge it. And it removes both viruses, bacteria, biofilm, and mold. And we have, of course, tested this in labs, and we tested it in a field test with a hospital. And it works extremely good. We mix it into paint, then you can just paint it on surfaces, and then you get the effect. So that's how easy it can be done. We have different paints for different surfaces. So the status of this product now is that we produce it in Norway, and we actually have an office in London, and because UK is a very important market for us, but we can send this product now worldwide because it's very easy to store and easy to distribute. So we're making more products than paint. We are mixing it in cement, and we're also looking at mixing it in lunar regolith. And the reason for that is we believe that we can, with a certain modifications, we can make such a charge that it repels lunar dust. Lunar dust is a huge problem, the time we're going to the moon. And this is what we hope to achieve there. Same with textiles, to integrated textiles, both on Earth, but also in space. So both inside of the space suits, because I mean, you don't want fungi to grow there. And again, maybe you have to test that. We have some ideas about it, how to repel lunar dust because of the electric charge. So our company, you could say that the main engine is the earthly business. We deliver now to the health sector and to properties that wants to be painted, defense, and we produce and integrate it in medical products. But the orbital stage, that's where my heart is to paint space stations and spacecrafts and spacesuits and interplanetary disinfectant. And I've said to the International Space Station people I talk to that we can paint it for free as long as I can go there to paint it. So, of course, this is a scientific product. Many are interested in the science around this, and you can read all about it on our webpage. So we're trying to do healthy and safer spaces, both on Earth and on the moon. And another punchline I could throw in the end is that the museum here in Norway, which have Viking ships, they are looking at painting because they don't want mold to attack the old Viking ships that are kind of exhibited in the Norwegian museums. So we are trying to save Viking ships and spaceships. So yeah, that was my short introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brage. Now I would like to invite Dr. Catherine Rahill. Catherine is CEO of Newman Nexus, a startup pioneering consulting firm specializing in human factors, AI, and human-computer interaction. She has a distinguished career spanning space exploration, advanced air mobility, and organizational strategy. And previously, she worked as a senior scientist for the Chief Scientist Office of NASA's Human Research Program, specialized in mitigating human performance risk in long-duration spaceflight. Dr. Catherine Rahill, the screen is yours.
So yeah, thank you for the introduction, Silvio. So yeah, as Silvia mentioned, I recently departed NASA earlier this year to just kind of explore some different opportunities. I was at NASA for about 4.5 years. I learned a great deal of knowledge, especially being in the Chief Scientist's office. So, and I decided to start my own company called Newman Nexus. And just to give you a little bit of background that kind of paved the foundation for Newman Nexus, I'll begin with just some of the things that inspired me that I learned from NASA to basically start my own company. So, as Sylvia mentioned, I was supporting the chief scientist of NASA's Human Research Program and overseeing all elements related to human space flight. So this includes human health countermeasures, space radiation biology, human factors behavioral performance, exploration medicine, and then research operations integration, which is implementing research both in ground and spaceflight analogs, such as ISS, Airbus, and also our own in-house analogs that we utilize to study a range of different team and human performance risks. So I rotated through most of these, and yeah, throughout my 4.5 years, I definitely learned a great deal. Human factors behavioral performance was probably my, favorite one. It was actually the element that I was currently rotating through when I decided to kind of depart and explore new opportunities. So a few things that I'm bringing to the table with Newman Nexus in my company is encompassing all of these things that I've learned when it comes to the health risks of long duration space travel. This is certainly not all, but these are the ones that I was predominantly most involved in terms of overseeing research, supporting research, or just having a hand in developing milestone research plans, whether it be for lunar or Martian space exploration. So when it comes to vision, obviously with my background in psychophysics perception, this is one of my favorite ones that I enjoy learning the most. But really astronauts on average, tend to come back with certain difficulties and eye abnormalities due to the increased intracranial pressure and UV exposure. I'm sure that there's people on the call that are very well versed in that area, in a lot of these different areas. So yeah, when it came to cardiovascular space radiation, I published a paper looking at, unfortunately, with radiation and human performance in space flight, we often have to resort to kind of catastrophic events to model a lot of these different types of risk likelihoods when it comes to both, long duration space flight to the moon and also even longer to Mars. So did research, a little bit of research on that with mice, muscle and sensory motor, bone mass, bone degradation. I studied a lot of the microarchitecturization of bone and how bone loss varies inter-individually quite significantly between astronauts and also between men and women, and also at different parts of the body. We are seeing more rapid rates of bone loss in some areas than others. Sleep and fatigue, that's a pretty common one in terms of implementing lighting on the ISS and doing research on, the customization of, what astronauts actually, their feedback was very significant when we were kind of transitioning and replacing all of these lighting on the space station. And of course, exercise and fitness, that's a huge significant thing I spend a lot of time with. And then, of course, cognition and mental health, especially when it comes to isolation and confinement for extended periods of time. So what led me to come to NASA was my dissertation introduced a new subspecialization called lunar psychophysics. For those of you who aren't familiar with psychophysics, I have a slide that I will be kind of providing a quick overview for. So what inspired me to want to introduce this field of study is I was reading through a lot of the old Apollo archives, and this was the intent to understand, what are we to expect for Artemis when it comes to lessons learned, decades ago. And I found a significant trend in astronauts reporting significant perceptual difficulties, and they ended up being very significant. These were not adequately addressed, in my personal opinion. That's not NASA's opinion, but my personal opinion was I was surprised that this was not more heavily addressed, but I think it was because the astronauts were only going to be on the lunar surface for a few days at a time. And so when it comes to long duration stays, though, I wanted to revisit this and see if there was something actually here to, inquire. So one of the notable missions that stuck out to me was this was an EVA incident with Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell. They were traversing an area, probably, I think within the first few hours of reaching the lunar surface. And in their first EVA, they were to traverse a certain crater to collect samples. And they estimated the crater to be approximately 275 meters away. And as they kept traversing towards the crater, it kept, they weren't getting any closer to be frank. So they ended up underestimating it so significantly that they were at risk for depleting their own oxygen resources. And by the time they actually approached the crater, they were so disoriented. They actually had to abort the mission without being aware, and this came through in the after action reviews, that they were actually only 50 feet away from the edge of the crater to collect the samples. But anyways, it wasn't necessarily a successful part of that mission. But that was the first one that stood out to me that inspired me to look into this more. On Apollo 12, Al Bean overestimated the slope of craters, which are often partially concealed by shadows on the moon. This is often due to the lack of an aerial perspective or atmospheric perspective. And, when it comes to depth perception and also just the significant brightness of the sun without the protection of an atmosphere, that was, predominantly the reason, in addition to microgravity and other disorientation, why slope estimations were often incorrectly estimated. And as you can see here for Apollo 15, without the absence of an atmosphere, slopes and objects on the moon can just conceal into the blackness of space, and you may not even see that it's there. So when we are looking at these different types of, scenarios, it's something to consider when, how can we create a countermeasure or mitigate this, or, time of day planning for EVAs and so forth. There's so many considerations to take into account, especially with the new locations and areas we're considering going back to the moon. Last one I'll give an example for was Apollo 17. This one really inspired me to study. I did a dual dissertation in psychology and physics, and I specifically particle physics, because the sporadic light scattering that you can see up here was very, very detrimental if astronauts ended having to drive through kind of one of these spots. And this is usually due to what was called like complex particle light scattering, sporadic surface scattering, ion sputtering. There's a lot of different, and simply just astronauts' interaction with the, lunar regolith itself and that electromagnetic static and so forth is a possibility as to why these things happen. But I do have a quote from Gene Cernan here, where he said the surface features were obscured when direct sunlight is on the visor, although the sunshades on the lunar extravehicular visor helped reduce the glare. We probably ran into a small crater or maybe a boulder we couldn't see due to looking right into the sun. So even with the protection that they had, they were still at risk and often, getting themselves into pretty risky accidents. Now, this isn't really widely, advertised for obvious reasons, but there were a lot of at risks and, a lot of mobility issues, falling over, just when we see what we see on, TV, and I'm sure that a lot of people, can, chime in on that as well. There was a lot more to the story when it came to the challenges that they really faced. So when we think of psychophysics, and I refer to this in my dissertation as terrestrial psychophysics, which is essentially human sensory perception and physiological responses to physical stimuli that we know here. So light, touch, sound, taste, smell. For my dissertation, I wanted to focus on the visual aspects. So, looking at, how these properties of our external environment, when it comes to light scatters in space very differently on Earth. And we have ecologically and biologically evolved to perceive light on the visible spectrum that we know that is Earth. And that is just simply not necessarily the case when we get to space. And so for a number of reasons, we not only need protection, but when we're considering other factors such as, optical, distortions due to intracranial pressure, microgravity and other things. The long duration effects of just, your vision in space, it definitely is something that I wanted to bring to NASA and explore. And so here are all the factors that obviously I took into consideration, like I mentioned, from the visual to Earth-based light scattering as kind of the baseline for what we know in terms of vertical perception. Then obviously studying that on the moon, and implementing this into virtual reality. So essentially, that was pretty much the only way you can do it when I was in my PhD program. So I rendered a lot of this in VR to test and model a lot of these different kind of light scattering equations that we use to study light scattering on the moon, and tweak them a little bit, which was pretty beneficial, I think. And I think it definitely contributed a little bit of knowledge in terms of our true understanding of how we model light in space and particle physics in space when it comes to human perception and visibility. So, yeah, and so the motivation and future implications of this that I brought to NASA and then I kind of wanted to continue was obviously understanding the long-term visual, but also just the long-term health impacts in general for astronauts. So starting with the visual piece and then expanding it like I did at NASA to understanding all of these other different areas, kind of coalescing that into a knowledge base that, can be the foundation of what my company is. So another piece of that too is I wanted to look into looking at advancing AI-based perceptual error correction systems or health-based systems in general, which I had a really great opportunity of getting involved in when it came to, basically creating fully autonomous systems that can provide astronaut support in deep space, especially for long duration missions, and kind of using the lunar surface and lunar analog environments as a platform so we can build, incredibly robust artificial intelligence support systems. So when astronauts are experiencing up to 30 to 45-minute delays in communication with mission control, they have all the resources they need in-house to troubleshoot and monitor and so forth. So yeah, bringing that to Newman Nexus. Newman Nexus, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the theory of von Neumann probes, but basically I named my company after the von Neumann probe theory, which again, it is a theory, but it is something that I think is pretty inspirational for the overall mission of human spaceflight, which is, they're self-sustaining kind of autonomous probes that can explore various parts of the galaxy, and wherever they end up landing on any planet, on any asteroid, they're able to utilize whatever materials or resources are there to remanufacture, replicate, learn, study, and then obviously transmission everything that they're learning back to Earth. So, and the Nexus piece is obviously, startups, as I'm sure most of you are very familiar with, require a lot of, both independence, but also partnerships. And while, at NASA and then post NASA, I have made some really amazing opportunities to connect with a few partners that I'll get to in the slide after this. But this was kind of my vision too when it comes to deep space and AI, understanding how do we provide, in-flight and, crew support autonomy, detection and classification of deep space threats, troubleshooting diagnostics of onboard systems, whether it be the actual systems of the spacecraft itself or crew health, behavioral performance monitoring, both physical and behavioral. And also creating ways to kind of reduce risk of injury from dynamic loads caused by gravitational loading and unloading. So those are kind of some of the things that I'm envisioning when, I'm looking for my partnerships. And but it is certainly not limited to these in any capacity. So these are the partnerships that I have been engaging with currently. So currently I'm working with Space Health Research. If you're familiar with Space Health Research, the CEO, Miles Harris, is a very good colleague of mine, and he does spaceflight analog research on a remote island off of Scotland. So he has one of the most highest fidelity analog environments I think I've seen with NASA when it comes to ground, analogs in terms of evaluating crew and health and performance, for space flight countermeasures. And then, of course, optimal cities. I've been engaging with Sylvie and Caesar to explore opportunities with their plans for strategic healthcare opportunities and satellite city urban planning and mapping. And then also biosynergy. The CEO, Daniel Herman, and we worked on an Antarctic trek together. We ended up having a pretty successful experience with the famous explorer Justin Packshaw. We collaborated while I was at NASA. So Daniel worked with NASA and Justin to provide supplements and other types of nutritional countermeasures for a 60-day Antarctic trek by kite skiing. So it was pretty rigorous, but I very excited to be working with these people and also happy to answer any questions. This is my email if you want to reach out at any point, but I will wrap up my big spiel. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Now we have another exciting guest, Dr. Thais Russomano. Dr. Thais Russomano, she's a professor with over 30 years experience teaching and researching in aerospace medicine, space physiology, aerospace biomedical engineering, and telehealth and digital health. She was involved in over 400 scientific events and in over 500 scientific papers and lectures. She's been in zero gravity as well, and she is extremely passionate about space education and innovation. Professor Russomano, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Stu, for the introduction. I'm going to try to present a kind of overview of space medicine, what we roughly know, and some challenges and achievements that we had over the years. But in the end, I think that the main message is that we need to integrate more other areas, like to be more inter and multidisciplinary, because if we are not living on the moon or not exploring Mars with humans, it's because of my area. As Silvio said, I've been there for 30 years, but we need to understand that we are Earth beings. We have evolved for millions and millions of years here on Earth, and then we are basically a product of our planet. So we are at the stage now of being the Homo sapiens sapiens, but I believe that we are going to become Homo sapiens spatian, or whatever it's going to be called in the near future, because to leave the Earth and work on Mars or on the moon and live for years and years outside of our planet we are going to have to change our anatomy, our physiology, and live well with that. And we don't do that nowadays. This is the name of our webinar is Space for Health, but it's very important to understand that when you are in space, you are very unhealthy. Now we become unhealthy. Even if you consider the astronauts, men and women that went to space, we were very well, let's say, they were very well selected and trained. So the pre-flight mission was, let's say, preparing these people to face these hostile environments. Could be in orbit, with microgravity, radiation, emotional issues, and so on. If we have a base on the moon one day, we are gonna let's say, deal with the aspects of the moon, like hypogravity, not micro, but hypogravity, no atmosphere, low temperature, no protection against radiation, very different cycle in terms of day and night. If you go to Mars, it's even worse somehow, because we are going to have a very thin atmosphere, but this thin atmosphere has 96% of CO2, low temperature, hypogravity again, and a huge distance that can vary between 50 to 400 million kilometers. The ISS and the moon base will be very somehow, not very easy, but easier in the sense that you can have a real-time, basically real-time communication at the speed of light for telemedicine to happen, not with Mars. So when we are thinking about going, and people ask me many, many times, when are we going to go to Mars? And when we are going to be there? We are there. We know how to get there. We have rovers there. We have landers there. But we cannot have humans yet because of the lack of knowledge in my area. And this is because the human body is extremely complex and it becomes even more complex if you consider men and women. Now we have anatomical, physiological difference that are very well known and clear. We have expressions of diseases, clinical diseases that are different between men and women. We have some knowledge about the human body in space, but it is based on male physiology, mostly. About 720 astronauts that went into space, 72 were women, so about 10%, let's say, were women. So we don't know a lot about the female physiology in space. We also have to consider, and it was discussed before, long-term missions and short-term missions, because the human body, although it is affected completely in space, it is affected in different ways. Each body system reacts in different ways. So you have moments that, sorry, not moments, situations that you cannot help. We are going to have physiological and psychological change when you are in space. We have what I call operational medicine, which is more related to the daily activities of astronauts, like how to sleep, how to have your hygiene done, or food, diet, and so on. And you also have some diseases that can affect astronauts. It's not the physiological, psychological response to the environment. It is clinical diseases. So I divided the space medicine in these three main areas. This chart is just to show that different body systems would react in different ways. And the time scale is very different. For example, for the neurovestibular system, the yellow line, it responds very quickly and adapts very quickly. But the blue line, which is bone and could be muscle as well, it responds slower but continuously. So short-term missions, I'll be very aware about the neurovestibular chains, long-term missions, bones and muscles. For example, just for you to understand that, radiation, if you compare the first bar with the last bar, you can see the difference between being here on Earth for a year and going to Mars for 500 days. It is the amount of radiation, deep space radiation, not even the orbital one, because the orbital one, you are still protected with one of the layers of protection, that is the magnetosphere. And on the moon and on Mars, you are not going to have that. So this is very important. we need also to remember that it's not just the body, but the mind is affected when you are in a very hostile environment with isolation. Sometimes it's very monotonous to be in space. Believe it or not, astronauts sometimes get depressed, and there are difficulties in terms of communication, different languages, different backgrounds, different religions even. So are this area of psychology and psychiatry, space psychology and psychiatry, it's very, very important. Not in the beginning of the manned space flight or human space flight, it was not very well explored, but nowadays it is a source of concern. And we have many other areas that you don't have a clue almost, no? Space pharmacy, we basically export what we have here on Earth uh, as medications or the dose or intervals of the use of medications, we just export to space, knowing that the metabolism is different, the absorption of food and medication is going to be different than the excretion. So we need to learn much more if we want to really live and work in space and learn how, for example, just here is an example of a parabolic flight experiment with laparoscopy surgery, which means that we need to know about how to perform surgery in space. And this is in its infancy. Genetics in space extremely important, because whatever changes over there, if you come back to Earth, then it might affect your life here, your readaptation here, in terms of health issues that you can have. We are talking very much about space tourism, and Silvio mentioned, are we old enough to go, or are we not old enough? Sorry, are we too old to go into space? And he come up with some examples. But are we sick? No, can we go into space if we are sick? Nowadays, the Corps of Astronauts, as I mentioned, the medical selection training is it's very good. We send very healthy people into space. But here you have Stephen Hawking that couldn't talk or move by himself because he was a famous guy. He was invited to become a member of a parabolic flight team, and he participated in this let's say experiment in space. But can we send sick people into space? As I just mentioned, we don't know how medication is going to behave in space. So it's very important to understand that space tourism is going to bring a completely different perspective to space medicine that possibly we are not prepared, because if you look at the papers, if you look at the missions in space, we are considering health people. We are not considering people with diabetes or cancer or hypertension, for example, things that are very common nowadays. So that's what I want to mention now, and to finalize with some solutions and how we need to merge different areas to promote well-being and the health of astronauts in space. Of course, train the astronauts in health issues, produce some medical tools, very important. We need softwares, we need robots, we need artificial intelligence. We need to have this area really helping humans in space, not just on Mars, that telemedicine is going to be very, very difficult with 3 to 24 minutes delay in each way, depending on the position of the planets, but in space missions for emergencies and so on. So we need a better structure in this sense. We need better algorithms. We need AI for that. Here on Earth, we can use, and we are using virtual reality, for example, augmented reality, holograms, and so on. And I've been involved in research using virtual reality. As Silvio mentioned, I'm a professor, and I've been working in many different universities here in Europe and South and North America, even Asia, like India and the Philippines and so on. I'm becoming very one of my goals is to make space medicine more popular, and not just teaching, but also conducting and or participating in research. So virtual reality, artificial intelligence, we need that. Or without that, we cannot speed up the colonization of the moon or Mars one day. So we have gone a very, very big way from Gagarin to what we dream now, to return to the moon and establish a base on Mars. But very unfortunately, this area that's extremely important, and I'm not saying just medicine, I think that the health area, very inter and multidisciplinary, consider also the technical aspects, like as I mentioned, artificial intelligence, computer science, engineering, and so on. We are still not, we don't know enough, in my opinion. So it will be very risky to send someone to Mars nowadays, although it can be to establish a base on the moon. I think that it is more, let's say, um, feasible. And I'm very sad that we lost decades of knowledge since in 1972, the last mission of the Apollo happened. And we lost all this time. We could have learned so much about hypogravity, lunar dust, how to live and work in a different celestial body. Would be much more prepared, let's say, to go to Mars. So thank you very much. I hope
Thank you very much, Thais.
Yes.
You can connect with Thais to explore this further. And I would like to invite now Dr. Martin Dinov. He's an entrepreneur, founder of Mind, working on bringing adaptivity at scale for supporting and improving mental well-being and mental performance in real-world situations. He's passionate about the interaction of technology and humanity and applying science and technology for the betterment of the individuals and society. Dr. Martin Dinov, it's great to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks, Silvio. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here. It's nice to be in the RSA. So rush through quite a lot of slides talking about neuroscience and AI and a little bit of what I work on, less focused on the company that I'm building and a startup, and more a little bit sort of on the science and background and concepts behind it, sort of as food for thought, hopefully. So what I'm interested in is bringing neuroadaptive technology to real world settings. I did my PhD in on the topic, so neuroscience and AI and neuroadaptive systems. I was funded by the UK Ministry of Defense very generously. And I have a special interest in how this is applied to long duration space missions. Very quick disclaimer, this is my own personal opinions, and this is not, I'm encouraging or discouraging any particular product, technology, concept, or approach. It's my own personal views. So intended more as an academic talk, really, than anything else. So when we're talking about health and well-being, it's increasingly becoming possible and important to have personalized interventions, personalized well-being, personalized health. And that's what neuroadaptivity enables or can enable. And so what is a neuroadaptive systems? Basically, you're continuously measuring psychological or physiological kind of signals, interpreting them, recognizing some state variables, and then adapting the feedback to the individual or changing the environment. So maybe changing the content that's shown to the person, changing lights, temperature, depends really on the environment. It can be in a vehicle, can be in a space station, can be in a VR environment. And neuroadaptivity is kind of a big concept. It encapsulates arguably neuro and biofeedback, and it's related to neurotechnology, but not the same thing. So neurotechnology can be sort of intracranial implants, that sort of thing, which is not quite prime time ready, but probably over the next decade or two, we're going to see a lot more advancements there. It's also extracranial, non-invasive stuff, some of which is used in real-world settings now, but it's quite bulky, complex, and has lots of issues with like movement, noise, and so on. If you've ever used EEGs or FNIRS devices like this, or are familiar with them. So another approach that is less neurotechnology, but arguably measuring some of the same signals is sort of wearables, looking at heart rate variability or skin conductance, movement patterns, and so on from, Apple Watch, other consumer wearables. But you can also look at tone of voice. You can look at computer vision-based recognition of the person's psychological, physiological state, their movement patterns again, and so on. So at Mind, we're heavy focus on speech, emotion recognition, stress recognition. We do heart rate variability-based stress detection from wearables, and looking at some other context signals. I'll go back to that in a moment. But basically, how neural is it if it's not a neural measurement? And the answer is sort of it doesn't matter that much as long as you can actually measure the biomarker of interest, right? So there's sort of a transduction happening from your brain if you're looking at psychological or sort of neural states. There's some kind of transduction, and you measure that signal, and actually oftentimes that's a more interpretable signal in the real world setting. And so you can actually end up building this kind of closed loop neuroadaptive systems by measuring proxy signals. So if we take a step back, how good are people at reading emotions or physiological or psychological states of other people? If you look at the literature, generally it's sort of in the 60 to 80% accuracy range, depending on what you're measuring and how you're measuring it. And if we ask the question of how good are machines and AI today, the answer is generally better than human, increasingly. There's some caveats there, but for the most, it's true. And so the point is that these kind of proxy signals, they allow us to actually measure psychophysiology in real world settings effectively now. And we're doing that, for example, at Mind and integrating the technology in different earthly settings, though very interested in bringing this to long duration space missions again. And so those kind of proxy signals from speech, computer vision, wearable data, they don't have the issues of neural signals. And so you can kind of have neuroadaptive systems through these proxy signals. So what do we do with all of that? Well, we build the systems, we deploy them, and then we can have more targeted interventions, more personalized content, and basically support people better, right? And so what's currently missing is sort of a solution that you can deploy in any setting in theory, and that's what we've basically built. It's sort of structured as a SaaS product at the moment, but we've also run it on devices. And the idea is that we basically have a pretty robust way of measuring the state, the psychophysiology, and certain biomarkers of people, and then nudging them towards better target states. As a company, we focus on different areas. A lot of our focus is on mobility right now. There's a lot of interest there, but we've done stuff in healthcare, well-being, defense. We're working with Silvio and Optimal Cities on some things. And eventually, I hope to bring this to, supporting astronauts on long duration space missions, especially to Mars, where, as Thijs was just saying, we really need these kind of autonomous systems that can diagnose and that can basically support people's, mental health, physical health. And so I asked GPT to generate some kind of concepts of what this could look like. Kind of have like a physical environment where people go to relax and sort of in a data-driven way get them to a certain target state, a more optimal state. But you can also do things with obviously with VR, which is a lot more weight efficient. And nowadays, there's programmable smells and all sorts of stuff you can do in VR. So I think that's probably the more likely approach. And it's something happy to talk with all of you about this. Very excited, but I'm over 5 minutes, so leave it at that. If you're interested, check out the company, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very exciting presentation. And I would like to invite Leo Bowd. He leads the Scent of Life company, dedicated to the well-being of astronauts through the stimulation of the olfactory sense. He's experienced in life sciences, and also he studied perfumery at the Gross Institute of Perfumery. So, Leo, the screen is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Silvio. I am delighted to be with you today to present my project, SOUL. SOUL stands for Scent of Life. The mission of this project is to support astronauts on mission by giving them access to the sense of Earth. It is a project to stimulate astronauts' sense of smell. It is also what we call a countermeasure. In our case, this countermeasure is a means to stimulate, maintain, and improve their well-being. So how are things in space regarding the sense of smell? It's bad. Take a look at this photograph on the International Space Station Columbus module, where astronauts conduct experiments. Project yourself. No one can open the window to ventilate, as Brady mentioned. The International Space Station has been orbiting the Earth for 26 years and has been home to more than 266 astronauts, both women and men. No scented candles to make the air more pleasant, no air freshener spray, no chocolate cakes in the oven, no cinnamon apple pie, and more. So, how can we improve the situation for astronauts? By exploiting the beneficial effects of olfaction. What are the beneficial effects of olfaction? What do you see in this picture? Two things: a scientific view of the physiological phenomenon and a simplified representation of a cup of coffee. What does this picture tell us? It shows the path of odorant molecules to the olfactory bulb, which then sends signals to the limbic system. But we can also guess, for all those who enjoy drinking coffee, the hot steam and the taste associated with the coffee. The pleasure is there. When there is pleasure for the person judging the smell as pleasant, then the individual's stress and anxiety are reduced, and that person's physical and intellectual skills could be significantly improved. In addition, the beneficial role of olfaction in certain therapies is more and more established. For example, in the fight against Alzheimer's disease or memory loss in the elderly. How, in space today, do astronauts have access to smell they find pleasant? For the moment, the means to achieve this are very limited and clearly insufficient. In this photograph, NASA astronaut Michael Hopkins appears to be smelling a flower. His whole face is smiling. Looking at him, we might even want to smile with him. It's an expression of intimately felt pleasure. But do they have access to the smells of a field of flowers, a meadow in summer after the hay has been cut, a pine forest and more? No. Our ambition is to bring these sensations of olfactory pleasure to astronauts, taking into account all the constraints of existing and future stations on the Moon as on Mars. Today, our sole project is dedicated to astronauts. Tomorrow, astronauts on a mission will be working with olfactory support. In fact, their experience and the use of similar means of accessing smells will help a great many people on Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leo. I would like to ask a question to the panel. And hopefully, if anyone from the public has any questions, feel free to use the chat. So my first question is, imagine you have a free ticket to teleport anywhere in the solar system and spend a week there. Where would you go? And you can give a short answer and 2 maximum sentences. Broge, I'm happy to start with you. So free ticket in solar system, spend 1 week.
Well, it depends on the facilities that are established on that place. Is there a toilet there, for example? So no, I would really like to go to the moon as a space tourist someday and spend a couple of weeks there. And I really hope that many of us get the opportunity to do that in the not so distant future. I just foresee, as many of you probably have thought about also, you could have like a huge kind of stadium that you could, while you still are strong in your legs before you get moon weakness, you could jump and dive in the pool from 100 meters or something. That would be cool. So I really hope that space tourism to the moon is becoming available in my lifetime.
Thank you, Broge. What about you, Catherine?
I'd probably say, the moon was the first initial one, but I think Mars, specifically probably around Jezero Crater or something, because I know that there's and also, I definitely go to Mars and just try and recover all of the rovers. that have gone there, wipe off some of their solar panels, So that's probably what I would do for a week if I had the facilities and resources to go do that and get
Thank you
any
very much.
that we couldn't from them prior. So yeah, that's where I would go.
Thank you. Thais?
I think that I would go to the moon. I think that's very attractive. It's our natural satellite, and as I said, it was a pity that we left in 72 and we completely forgot about the moon for all these decades. So I would like to, if I could, I would go to the moon.
Thank you. What about you, Martin?
Anywhere would be exciting, right? Anywhere in space, to be honest. But yeah, it depends on the facilities. Mars is sort of a particular obsession of mine, so probably Mars, the lava tunnels there. It'll be cool to be on an asteroid, one of the larger asteroids as well, with all the life support systems in place, though. And probably not alone. I think it would suck to be in any of those places alone for too long.
Yeah, that's a good point. What about you, Leo?
Thank you for the question. I would go to the moon. I would watch this wonderful desolation, but then I would look at the Earth. And I think this is the most spectacular scenery we can have, actually. Everything we knew, everything we've seen, everything that is our history is just there. And the blue marble in the darkness could be a sensational view. So I would go for this one.
Thank you very much. Do we have an interesting question? Do you think there will be more focus on personalized aerospace medicine and space genomics? Certain genetic mutations could potentially mean that a person is more or less susceptible to worse health outcomes when subjected to zero gravity and space radiation. I think that's probably a really good question for you, Thais.
Yes, no, it's a very important question, and I believe that it is the future, not just for space medicine, but the terrestrial medicine as well. So we learned that we say in medicine there is no disease, but people with diseases, no, which means that each patient will react differently because of many factors, and of course in space it is not different. We are still humans in space, so we're reacting more or less in the same way. Each one of us will express, let's say, a situation, an emergency or a clinical situation in our own way. So personalized medicine is the answer for that, and it's for space and for Earth, I believe.
Thank you, Thais. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Catherine Rayo, on this?
No, yeah, I guess just from my experience at NASA, I know there was an emphasis on omics. I believe that they recently revamped their entire omics database to make it easier for researchers to utilize. So there is, I think that NASA is going to be actively looking into that collaborative effort, probably between the two elements of the human research program, the radiation and human health. Maybe exploration medical capability as well. So, but I know that if you submitted a proposal, I think on something like that, it would definitely align with definitely some of the top risks for that. So, yeah.
Thank you. This question is for Leo. Has your research shown what the most popular smell is among the astronaut community?
Thank you for the question. First, every astronaut's experience of spaceflight regarding olfaction is different. So I have no exact one answer for how is it to smell in space. It's different for everybody. There is some common experience that astronauts are making. The first one is having fresh fruits. And one of the fresh fruit that has been flying since the Mir era is actually the orange. So when you have a fresh orange flying around in orbit, you can smell it. And that's a common experience among astronauts, that this smell is really significant and interesting. Another one is a lot of astronauts that flew with the Soyuz module, they flew back and they landed in Kazakhstan, where you have this big meadow of grass around. And when you open the hatch after 6 months without smelling different smell, and you get this smell of cutted grass, it's a shock, and it's something that is really loved and missed throughout the community. But again, every astronauts are different.
Thank you very much, Leo. The next one, I think it's a great question for both Brage and Martin. How can we look to integrate some of these interventions or innovations so that designers and innovators come together to create a comprehensive and cohesive offering as opposed to standalone designs or creations? This can apply to design and architecture, mental health and well-being, and medicine.
Yeah, I think the best way is to meet over a glass of wine. No. everybody here. No, I think, of course, I think this meeting is of course one step ahead when we meet each other and learn about each other's work here. I've made a note of several things here that I want to follow up. We are a lot of people and companies that are doing interesting things, and combining our efforts is certainly something we will do. And Catherine had a slide on her kind of partners, and maybe we should have it all together here. So yeah.
Thank you, Brage. Martin, what do you think? If you're still with us. Okay. Well,
I have a question to Leo too, actually. Maybe that was the most exotic subject, the smell in space. So have you looked at, I mean, even when you just go up in an airplane, your senses is kind of dulled. Have you looked at that and what they are doing to make the food taste and everything?
Yes, absolutely. Food is one of the biggest challenge because physiologically an astronaut have a different physiology with actually digerating. So you're not really angry. So you need to have this feeling for eating. You need to make food appetizing. So that's a big challenge. But then we can see some difference in the way astronauts are tasting the food with the sense of smell. That's a big difference. And then with your question, you're targeting another bigger question, which is how do we perceive our smell and different smells when we're in space, right? And this is a question that is different to every astronaut. Indeed, there's this idea of having a reduced sense of smell, but though there's no exact measure that exists about how it's reduced. And then when you speak with astronauts, some people are more sensitive to some smells, some other not, and you have a different experience altogether. What we know is that looking at how we can improve the sense of smell is actually an issue that is more than smell. It's about well-being, and it's about how we bring what makes us human and our senses in general when we go to Mars. And that's absolutely important because 1.5 year travel without having access to different smells, it's an issue, and it's already an issue for 6 months.
If I can just say something regarding an airplane and a spacecraft, we for sure have different mechanisms that are affecting the ability to smell something, because on a plane you have a bit of hypoxia, no, because the pressurization is not like the same as at sea level, but you don't have microgravity. And in space, you have an environment that has 20% oxygen, so you are not having hypoxia, but you have microgravity because of the free fall of the spacecraft or the space station. So maybe the result is the same, but through different mechanisms, I would believe.
Thank you very much, Thais. And a last question is, as we aim for Venus, what will be some of the future steps in alleviating the effects of zero G upon the circulatory system during prolonged space missions? Is there a studied link between these effects and the mental state of the astronauts? Maybe something for you, Thais?
Well, yeah, the cardiovascular, remember that chart that I showed the figure? Now you had the red line was the cardiovascular system. It was believed that it responds, let's say, over time, let's say a week, 10 days, and then after a month and a half, it would, let's say, adapt to space. But nowadays we know that doesn't happen, that the cardiovascular system presents change over time. One thing that it is important is to exercise. So exercise, there are three, let's say, equipment in space that are used for exercise that help the human body somehow to adapt to this environment or to accept this environment that's so different from here on Earth. So countermeasures like that are very important. To exercise in microgravity is different than to exercise at 1G. So one good countermeasure for that would be to have a small centrifuge. In fact, I built one once in one of my research centers. That's a centrifuge that is man-powered. So you exercise and you rotate the centrifuge, so you create a G-force. That doesn't have to be much, could be 1 to 2 Gs because you are at 0 G, or micro G, not 0 G, but micro G. So 1 to 2 Gs would be more than enough. So there are ways, and it's very important for long-term space missions to deal with the cardiovascular system and try to create countermeasures that would, let's say, keep it healthier in space. I don't know if it's, I always say that when the answer is too long is because we don't say anything that is useful. I say that to my students because if it's something is black and white, you just say no, yes, or no, a very short sentence. But it is, as I said, the human body is extremely complex, and you have many different types of presentations, from men, women, old, young, sick, non-sick, fit, non-fit. So nowadays it's a pool of very different people going to space. Even religion is interesting to discuss. Philosophical aspects of a space mission, psychological aspects, nutrition. So it's becoming so complex, and I think that there is a lack of integration inside the health, let's say, area, all these different aspects, and the integration with other areas like computer science, engineering, and so on. If you compare the space engineering with space medicine, you can see the difference. Even if you are not an engineer or if you are not a medical doctor, you can see that there is a huge difference in terms of progression. And I feel very sorry because I'm passionate by space. I love space medicine, but I can see and I teach in many different countries, and the knowledge is zero. I'm talking about countries that are, it's not countries that are poor or underdeveloped. No, good countries in the sense of they have money, they have good universities, but they have no knowledge about humans in space. It's difficult for me to go beyond introduction. So when I'm invited to give a lecture, it's the introduction because for me it's an introduction because I cannot go to the lung function in space or cardiovascular function in space or bones in space because unless it's a course because people don't have the basics. No, it's quite scary in this sense.
Thank you very much, Thais, and thank you very much, everyone. This was a very insightful session. And what I recommend is if you are a fellow, join the RSA Space Network, you can scan the QR codes or you go to the link. I also added in the chat the links to all the speakers. And if you're not a fellow, consider joining the RSA by scanning the QR codes. I would like to thank to all the speakers we had today, including the fellows and the special guests. And this is only starting. We have some exciting space showcases coming up next in the new year about space for prosperity, space for quantum and timekeeping and the communications. So keep in touch, connect, and let's unify minds and technologies to make space exploration and space expansion healthier and make it faster. See you next time. Thank you very much, everyone.